G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Institute, and today we're bringing you more guests from our Economics of a Pandemic webinar series. In this episode, we'll talk about the opportunities for Australia's manufacturing sector and new research from the Australia Institute's Centre for Future Work, which shows that Australia ranks last for manufacturing self-sufficiency among its global peers. As the pandemic interrupted global supply chains, a lot of focus has shifted back onto Australia's domestic manufacturing capabilities and what Australia has the capacity to actually make and manufacture onshore. Whether that question was about masks and PPE equipment, the ability to manufacture vaccines in future, or indeed the ability to manufacture toilet paper. And there's no doubt manufacturing has sustained some major and public blows in the recent past, particularly with the closure of the last car manufacturing plants in Geelong and Adelaide.
It's about how we honour the legacy for our manufacturing employees, past and present, our suppliers and the supplier community, but also our fans and the hundreds of cars that we have here today.
There are concerns tonight of a shortage of medical equipment as coronavirus spreads across the country.
We are just continuously firing off 3D print jobs to make the frames for the face shields, and then
the pandemic has highlighted our reliance on the rest of the world when it comes to manufacturing.
And now there are calls to make more things in Australia.
We can do more, from medical supplies to robots and auto parts. We could be seeing a surge in homegrown products.
Yes, I do believe that we can create a manufacturing industry which is a very significant portion of our GDP.
Best ways of bouncing back after the corona crisis would be to boost renewable energy spending in Australia.
There's going to be a new debate about reindustrialisation in Australia in the years ahead, and in particular how we do it powered by renewable energy.
The PM talks about economic sovereignty in the wake of this crisis. We're awaiting the government's electric car strategy. Is that a potential way, not just in terms of manufacturing, but also in terms of reducing reliance on foreign?
I'll have more to say about our manufacturing sector.
There's a lot of opportunity in manufacturing. In fact, it's not an old industry, as its reputation might lead you to believe. It is, in fact, the most innovation-intensive industry of the entire economy, generating better than average productivity growth, good jobs and exports, and most importantly, manufacturing possesses several key structural features that make it vital to the economic success of any economy, including Australia's. And that last couple of quotes is really a direct lift from the Centre for Future Work's report, Manufacturing Still Matters. And to talk about why manufacturing still matters and the opportunities for future growth, we spoke to Paul Bastian, the National Secretary of the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, and Jim Stanford, Economist and Director at the Centre for Future Work at the Australia Institute. This was recorded live on Tuesday, the 28th of July 2020, and things may have changed since recording. Welcome, Jim, and welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ebony. Thank you.
So we'll come to Jim, to you shortly, to go through the report that you've released today that people will be able to see in today's Australian Financial Review and Sydney Morning Herald. But first I want to come to you, Paul Bastian. Obviously, the pandemic has really renewed focus on the importance of having a robust manufacturing sector. Where do things stand for manufacturing right now?
Well, for us, first off, good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining in this webinar. For those who know the AMWU, they know that we have been campaigning around jobs for years and been campaigning and pushing the argument with any number of governments that manufacturing matters. We wholeheartedly believe that, manufacturing is important. A strong, resilient manufacturing sector is important for the economy. In Australia, it provides over 900,000 jobs, but more importantly, it has the potential to provide hundreds of thousands of more jobs. And these are jobs that are highly skilled, high wage, and secure jobs in our sector. But the pandemic has laid bare for all to see some of the arguments that we have been putting forward. For example, it's shown up that our economy has a lack of diversity. It's shown up that our economy has had an over-reliance on overseas supply chains. It's shown the failure of our trade and industry policies, all of which have left us with a lack of sovereign capability to be able to produce the goods we need. For far too long now, successive governments have let us down. Australia is the 14th largest global economy, but when it comes to manufacturing self-sufficiency, we rank last in the 36 nations of the OECD. That's behind nations like Latvia, Chile, and even New Zealand across the trench. And that's just not good enough for a developed economy like ours. 2/3 of global trade, is in manufactured goods. And we think it's time that we got our fair share of that trade. And that's why we commissioned the Australian Institute to look at the circumstances and policies that led to where we are now, where we've got a declining manufacturing sector. So today I'm happy to be part of the launch of a fair share for Australian manufacturing. This report provides us with a roadmap for rebuilding and revitalising Australian manufacturing, but more importantly for us, it provides us with an opportunity, if we're prepared to seize it, not only to grow manufacturing into the future, but to create hundreds of thousands of extra good jobs. Jobs, as I said, jobs that are high paid, high skilled and secure.
Thank you so much, Paul. And, there's never been a more important time for those good jobs with good conditions, as we've seen, particularly in this pandemic, the threat of insecure work really makes us all less secure. Jim Stanford, I'll come to you now to really launch this report and take us through it. It's called A Fair Share. It's available on the Centre for Future Work's website. I think you've put a link up there for everyone who's on the webinar with us today. I believe we've got just ticking up over 530 participants, so thank you all for joining us. Over to you, Jim.
Ebony, thank you very much. I'm really glad to join with you today, and thank you for hosting this. And we're really glad to partner with Paul Bastian and his fine union on this important work. We have this report called A Fair Share for Manufacturing that will be available on our website, and I've sent the link around. I'm going to show just a couple slides, and then we'll get into some Q&A discussion on it. So, Eb, I'm just noticing I'm getting a notice on my computer from Blue Blood, our lovely friends at Blue Blood, who run all of our technology at the Australian Institute, and they're telling me that my computer is going to shut down in 4 minutes for an automatic restart that they have scheduled. So, and I can't seem to find a way to stop it. So,
oh dear.
Happen is I'm going to go off, I think, when this shuts down. It generally doesn't take very long. I've been in this situation once before, and then I'll come back on. So you can ask Paul a couple questions.
No worries.
This is happening. Okay.
All right. Well, do you want to get started?
Yes,
how soon are you going to cut off?
Exactly. Very good. So then we'll see where we get to. So there's our website, my Twitter handle, the Centre's Twitter handle. Encourage folks to join the conversation in social media. There's the link again to the full report. Hey, I want to try one thing. Let's see how many people who are out there on social media right now. Let's use the hashtag #FairShare. I think it was Andrew Detmer, Paul, your colleague, president of the MWU, who proposed this hashtag. Let's see if we can get a couple hundred people use this hashtag in the next half hour or so. We'll get this trending, and that'll really scare the pants off the government. This is an incredible moment, really. We've known, as Paul mentioned, that we had to repair Australia's manufacturing base for years, but this pandemic has really made the question more and more urgent. First of all, we face the horrifying prospect that we might run out of essential supplies and equipment. Never mind high-tech ventilators and so on. What about masks? Because global supply chains were messed up. But there's going to be a bigger issue about global supply chains because, of course, lots of companies are rethinking where they put their facilities now in light of the disruptions caused by the barriers to trade. Also, interference in trade. Think about Donald Trump jumping into the mess and saying, no, we're going to keep all of our equipment for us, for Americans first. In that kind of world, you have to have a domestic base. We also have a huge void in the economy that we're going to have to work on repairing and reconstructing for years to come. And we think that the manufacturing sector can play a vital role there. So I think while the COVID pandemic has highlighted the urgency and risks that Australia faces because our manufacturing sector does not have the full rounded capacity that it needs, it's a bigger issue as well. I stress that this is not a question of nostalgia for, the good old days of large factories and when, manufacturing jobs made up a much larger share of the workforce. There's lots of concrete, modern, strategic issues that you can verify with data as to why manufacturing is not just another sector of the economy, but in fact plays a very strategic role. Innovation, Ebony, you mentioned there's no more innovation intensive sector than manufacturing, which means if you don't have manufacturing, you are going to be lagging everyone else. Export orientation of our products, most international trade, about 2/3 of international trade is in manufactured goods. So if you don't have a good manufacturing sector, you're shutting yourself out of a good chunk of that. There's a whole supply chain that depends on manufacturing. So jobs outside of manufacturing that depend on manufacturing being here. The incomes and productivity and jobs associated with manufacturing are vital. For example, 85% of jobs in the manufacturing sector are full-time jobs. And in an era when the whole shift to precarious work and insecure work and part-time work and casual work is dominating our society, having a part of the economy that offers high-quality full-time jobs is crucial. And I'm going to provide a little bit more data on that, Ebony, when I come back from this silly technical shutdown. So I'll pass it to you and Paul for just a couple of minutes, and I'll join you as soon as I can. I apologize for this, and I'll have words with Blue Blood after.
No worries.
Okay, see you shortly.
See you shortly, Jim. Paul, I want to pick up on something that Jim said just now about, it's not about being old-fashioned here, but I do get the sense that some people do think that about manufacturing, that that it's, it's a declining industry. Many people think it's on the way out. Do you think the pandemic has shifted that view? And what do you think we need to do to help make that shift in how the industry is perceived a bit more permanent?
So I think the pandemic certainly showed up the flaws in the policies that our successive governments have adopted for manufacturing. Manufacturing's not whole, as I said before. 2/3 of the world's trade's in manufactured goods, and it's actually growing. It's been declining here because of failure of government policy, particularly around industry policy and around trade. So we need a number of initiatives to make manufacturing grow again. This report outlines some of those. We've certainly have called loud and clear that, in our view, leaving aside some of the machinery things that we think are very important to embed in the policy situation, that in the first instance, what we want to see is the government start to fill up our factories. We need to make sure that we've got people in work and producing goods. And government can do that quite easily, in our view, by leading a Buy Australia campaign. It's no good to sit there and call for a Buy Australia campaign. The governments need to actually lead it. And they spend tens of billions of dollars in purchasing goods every year. And they can do that by giving priority for Australian jobs and Australian manufacturers. Likewise, this report calls for a Buy Australia Industry Council. We think the governments need to bring forward infrastructure programs, but they need to be transparent and open so that we can clearly see that they are maximising Australian participation in those infrastructure jobs and prioritising Australian jobs.
I want to ask about something that you mentioned in your kind of opening remarks there about how many people manufacturing actually employs, because I think we hear so much about how it's a declining industry. You tend to think of it as being small, but you said it still employs more than 900,000 people. Is that right?
It still employs upwards around 900,000 people. We've had some decline as a result of the pandemic, but we've had some consistent decline over a number of years now. But our point is that there is an opportunity to increase employment in manufacturing if we're prepared to seize the initiative. If something is to come out of COVID, it should be about us strengthening our economy, being able to grow our manufacturing sector, and take the lead from here. There is an opportunity, as the report says. We currently have a manufacturing trade deficit of around 180 billion. 127 billion of that comes from so-called free trade agreements that we've negotiated that really have not delivered for Australian manufacturing at all. We need to get those settings right if we actually want to get a share of that manufacturing. And if we aim for a fair share of manufacturing, and that is producing as much as we use and exporting as much as we import, we can create 400,000 jobs in manufacturing and 265,000 jobs downstream in domestic supply chains.
And obviously that's sorely needed at the moment. But yeah, I just wanted you to repeat that figure of how many jobs there actually are, because I feel like there's probably not a great understanding in the public about just how enormous and how many people the manufacturing sector does employ, even with the pandemic, compared to a lot of other industries that maybe get more attention in the mainstream economic debate than manufacturing has over the past couple of years, but employ, far fewer people. Paul, the next thing I wanted to ask you about is really what the government is doing. So obviously you're talking about a Buy Australia campaign and some of those other things, but it really is, it seems to me that the Commonwealth government has really got a renewed interest in manufacturing and has indicated that it sees it as being crucial to the economic recovery. And the National, God, I always forget the full name of it, the National COVID Coordination Commission, the NCCC, seems to have some type of special focus on manufacturing. Have you been involved in those discussions, and is there anything that you can tell us about that?
So I was part of the manufacturing task force that was part of the NCCC looking into manufacturing, and it started, in our view, with very ambitious goals, and there was certainly a lot of unanimity with the participants about what we needed to do. But I think it was somewhat of a missed opportunity. In my view, it spent far too much time looking at gas as the way to revitalise manufacturing industry. Mm-hmm. And certainly gas has to play a part in our future. But in my view, there is much more to manufacturing than heavy gas users. We wanted to see more emphasis on the policy issues about what we need to do to fill up our factories now, what we need to do around industry policy and trade policy. We wanted to see greater emphasis on seizing the opportunity now with renewable energies. We believe that we need to meet our net zero emissions targets, and we believe in any advanced manufacturing country, we need to be ahead of the curve when it comes to the use of renewable energies, and we thought that that was a failing of that commission.
Yeah, it certainly did seem to focus much more on gas than manufacturing. We've got Jim back. Thanks for joining us, Jim. Paul and I were doing great without you, but we're very pleased.
I noticed. Yeah, I noticed. I should have taken time to go and get a pint and then come back and let you guys carry on.
No, but if you would like to go back to your report, we'd really appreciate it.
I'm so sorry about that. That is just very embarrassing. The laptop has a mind of its own. It gives you 5 minutes notice that it's going to shut down. So you just got to hope you're not in the middle of something important when that happens. Anyway, thank you. I'll just pick up a few more bits from the report itself. We talk a lot about how the position of Australia in the global economy has really, I think, done a disservice to Australia's manufacturing sector and helps to explain the problem that we're in. I think most people on the webinar will know we have become precariously dependent on exports of primary products. Primary products means things that come from nature. So this includes minerals and resources that we dig out of the ground, also agriculture products, forestry, etc. Primarily minerals these days. And Australia used to be seen as a very sophisticated manufacturing powerhouse. Now we're seen as an exporter of the stuff that's buried in the ground under our feet. Primary products reached 75% of all our exports last year, a new record. And the problem is, there's years in which you get a very good price for iron ore and coal and so on, but there's years when you don't. The roller coaster of primary products is very well known. And it also means that we're foregoing all of the value added, the investment, the innovation, the technology, and the jobs that come with transforming our mineral wealth and our agricultural wealth into more high value products. So this is a graph from the report that shows our exports on one side, the left, and our imports on the right. And we have a lot of exports, but you see that they're dominated by the dark blue section of the bar, primary products making up 75% of our exports. Our imports, on the other hand, are dominated by sophisticated value-added manufactured products. In essence, things that are manufactured out of the primary products that we shipped overseas in the first place. So Japan and Korea and China and Europe and Germany and America are buying our primary products, making them into things like, high-tech vehicles, machinery and equipment, big screen TVs and other consumer goods, and then selling them back to us at a profit. And frankly, you don't have to be an economist to understand that's a losing proposition. And what we've seen as a result of that growing focus on primary exports is a rising deficit in our trade in manufactured products, which has gotten deeper and deeper and deeper. Basically, the more we dig out of the ground for export, the bigger the hole becomes that we're stuck in. $180 billion manufacturing trade deficit last year. This is one of many examples that we cover in the report. Lithium, hot new commodity because of the use of lithium in lithium-ion batteries and other technologies related to renewable energy. Australia, world's biggest exporter of lithium. How lucky we got this valuable product buried under our feet. The raw form that we dig it out in, which is a kind of a rock, is called spodumene. I didn't know that until I started this research, spodumene. And it sells for $750 a ton. So, okay, fine. And the price of spodumene goes up and down. In fact, in the last year or two, it's been down because there's a lot of spodumene and other raw lithium out there. First thing you have to do is process it into a chemical form that you can use in manufacturing, and that takes the value to $10,000 per ton. Until recently, we didn't do any of that in Australia. We just exported the raw stuff. But the real action happens when you turn that into batteries. The same amount of lithium becomes worth almost $150,000. And then when you install those batteries in electric vehicles and other products that use them, then it's worth millions of dollars. So we risk making the same mistake again that we've been making for decades unless we get our act together in manufacturing. The report goes through a number of other areas, challenges, barriers, mistakes that have been made around mineral policy, skills and vocational education, how we're managing our energy and failing to take advantage of the huge opportunity posed by the new technology of renewable energy, which is very useful, very reliable, and very cheap in industrial settings now. How to improve our businesses so that they can do a better job of developing our industry. The conclusion of the report is oriented around this goal of aiming for a fair share of manufacturing for Australia. The idea that we don't need manufacturers anymore is just nonsense. It's absolutely false. In fact, Australia purchases more manufactured goods every year. Most recent data, about $565 billion worth in 2017-18. The problem is that we're buying it, but we're not producing enough of it. Our research shows that we produce about 68% of our own needs in an aggregate sense. It's not like everything we use is purchased at home. There's a lot of two-way foreign trade, not balanced foreign trade, but in aggregate, we're only producing 2/3 as much as we use. And we should be producing as much as we use. In an aggregate way, we should be self-sufficient in manufactured products. And that's what most other industrial countries are. And in a way, the most shocking aspect or finding of our report, and the one that got a lot of media attention today, is that Australia ranks at last out of 36 OECD countries in terms of manufacturing manufacturing self-sufficiency. Lots of countries, most industrial countries actually, produce 100% or more in terms of the aggregate value of manufacturing output. Places like Germany produce way more than 100%. But Australia is at the bottom of the pack, which means that we're foregoing the jobs and incomes that could come with it. If, in fact, we got to a situation where we were producing as much as we use, the gains would be absolutely enormous. $50 billion a year in additional GDP, 400,000 plus jobs directly in manufacturing, lots of new exports, and so on. Now, this isn't utopian. Most other industrial countries are at that situation. There's no inherent reason why Australia couldn't be, and there's lots of tools at the disposal of government to make that occur, to achieve that fair share for manufacturing. And the report goes through a whole bunch of them. And this, again, isn't nostalgia. The cutting edge of modern practical economics in the global sense absolutely recognizes the value and necessity of active industrial strategies to develop key industries that have the features that we want: innovation intensity, export orientation, potential for productivity growth, anchoring strong supply chains. All the things that we talked about in manufacturing means that there's a social benefit from developing industries like manufacturing through active sector strategies. And we show the whole list of tools that are there in the box. The toolbox is full. I know that the coalition government likes to play with toys all the time, and here's a whole toy toolbox full of them to fix our manufacturing sector. Now, the longest journey has to begin with the smallest initial steps. So we identified, in conjunction again with the union, 6 incremental immediate things that the government could do, even in the current economic and political context. And I think that those would be a down payment, if you like, on the bigger, longer term strategy for rebuilding manufacturing that the country needs. So, I think this is a moment when we can change the conversation about manufacturing. I think that what seems like good luck of having all of this mineral wealth buried under our feet had an unintended and negative consequence of being complacent about our role in the global economy and thinking that we didn't need manufacturing anymore. And the pandemic has proven what we already knew, that argument is false. And I think that Australians, if you ask them, and we've done polling on this in the past as well in some of our previous research, they understand that Australia has to make stuff. They understand we can't have a post-industrial economy. They understand that manufacturing matters. And I think that both economically and politically, this is a moment when this demand for a fair share can absolutely be won. And we hope to inject these arguments into the debate that's going to come. So, Ebony, again, I apologize for jumping off the screen there for a couple minutes, and thank you for your patience.
No, that's all right. I feel like that was pretty seamless, you coming back in there, Jim. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you're able to log back in. I did just want to ask you before we move on to questions from the audience, and I can see a number of questions there. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. I can see we've got up over 600 attendees. So thank you all for participating and for your interest in this. Jim, I was really struck there by the figures on what would happen if we applied more advanced manufacturing to what we currently just export now as raw lithium. Can you unpack for me, not just using that, but like the sheer figures involved in that about how much additional, economic output and jobs and everything that goes on with that we could create if we just took that approach to just minerals. But obviously, there's other things than that. What are the other types of things where we could be really value adding, and how do we get a more balanced economy?
Yeah, I think in a way, adding value to resources is the kind of a no-brainer for Australia, given that we've got the resources, we're exporting the resources, and then we're re-importing the stuff that was made with our resources. So like #duh, let's do some of that work ourselves. And it's good work, it's productive work, it's technology intensive work, it supports high incomes. There's lots of other areas, though, Eb, where the same arguments work. Let's think about government procurement. Government spends something like up to $200 billion a year buying goods and services from outside firms and suppliers. Surely it's a no-brainer to say, well, this is money that's being financed by Australian taxpayers to meet a public good. Doesn't it make sense to try to maximize the Australian content in those purchases? Things like railway equipment, for example, public transit equipment, the steel that's used in buildings and bridges and other publicly funded infrastructure, even computers and technical equipment that's used in various public service settings like healthcare. So I think that's another one where, it's not far-fetched. We're not saying that we have to do everything ourselves. We're not saying put up a wall and everything that's used in Australia must be built in Australia. But we are saying that there's a place that we start from in terms of our endowments of resources, the public services and public infrastructure that we fund, the cities and communities that we live in, and the manufactured goods that we use. those are places where joining the dots to increased Australian investment, production, jobs, and income, I think should be a pretty straightforward thing. And Australian voters would appreciate it. This is why I stress it's a political winner as well as an economic winner, I think.
Paul, would you agree with that? Is there anything you'd like to add there?
I certainly agree with Jim. When you think of what's happened with the pandemic in terms of employment, what's going to continue to happen in terms of employment, now more than ever, the government needs to intervene into the market. Now more than ever, it needs to lead by example. It needs to do what we've talked about before about run a Buy Australia campaign, and as Jim says, guarantee increased local content in our infrastructure programs. That's what the government needs to be really doing now to ensure that we can rebuild manufacturing fast, fill up our factories with work, so that when we come out of this pandemic, we're ready and able to leverage off all of that.
Jim, Paul and I were talking a little bit before about the importance of good wages and good condition jobs that you find in the manufacturing sector. We've already touched in previous webinars, I think, on the role of insecure work in making us all less secure in a pandemic type of situation. But we do live in a globalized economy, even in a pandemic. How hard is it for countries to change the mix of industries that make up their economies? And Paul was also talking, I think it might have been while you're offline, about the role of free trade agreements in either helping or hurting domestic manufacturing. Can you shed any light on that?
Sure. Well, let's talk about the issue of jobs and wages in the first place. First of all, it isn't inevitable that manufacturing jobs are good jobs. Manufacturing is a very productive industry. It requires skilled, productive workers. So there's an economic base for good wages and good jobs, but it doesn't fall from the sky. We have to have unions and labor standards to make sure that the potential of those jobs is realized. And, thanks in part to Paul's union and other unions working in the manufacturing sector, that has, to a large degree, happened. There has been attempts by employers in the manufacturing sector to try and spread practices of precarious work and to try and use more part-time and casual jobs, no doubt about it. And we have to resist those. But the reality is, on average, manufacturing jobs are better than the jobs we see in the economy as a whole. They're somewhat higher income and they're much more likely to be full-time. And that gives one of the social reasons, if you like, the broader social benefits of a strategy to promote more manufacturing is precisely because with the right policies in place, you'll get better jobs. Now, what does that mean in a global economy? If we're going to pay good wages, doesn't that mean that we're competing ourselves out of existence? That's kind of the knee-jerk trickle-down argument that we've heard for ages, right? If manufacturing workers would just tighten their belts and take a pay cut, maybe then we could compete with Thailand and China and other low-wage countries. And that is so false. And the evidence that we put forward in the report confirms that. Countries that have very high wages and very good labor standards, like Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, they produce way more than 100% of their own needs. They're up around 110, 115, 120% of their own needs. And there's Australia down at the bottom with 68%. So there's no correlation between manufacturing success and low wages, especially when you zero in on the innovation-intensive high-tech industries that we really want as part of this. Now, I think the free trade agreements have, in a way, bought into that idea of low-cost competition is the most important thing to be aiming for. The free trade agreements just liberalized trade and tariffs. They opened up Australia's market to a flood of imports, and we've seen that. They were not very successful at stimulating demand for Australian exports, the manufacturers. We go through all 8 of the free trade agreements that have been in place for at least 3 years and show that in every case, the manufacturing trade deficit got worse, not better. And those free trade agreements were clearly part of the problem. So I emphasize that we're not being protectionist here. We're not saying put up a giant wall, put up big trade barriers. We recognize that trade is an important part of manufacturing. What we're arguing for is that trade has to go 2 ways and that we should be exporting more, not just importing more. So you could say that we're pro-trade. We just want a more realistic and balanced vision of how it has to occur.
Thanks, Jim. We might go now to questions from the audience. The first one is from Edward Carroll, who asks, how can we capitalise on the capacity for a green or clean manufacturing in Australia? Paul, you've already touched a little bit on this. I might come back to you on that and then we'll come to you, Jim.
So we've already said that we think there was a missed opportunity in the Commission to actually talk more seriously about the role that renewable energies can provide moving forward. They not only provide ensuring that we have energy supply, but they also have the potential. They will also lower the cost of energy, and importantly, it gives us great opportunities into new industries and new technologies. And we've just got abundant resources in terms of renewables available to Australia. We've had years and years of inconsistent messages from governments about climate change and renewables. The market's already showing that it's moving on. It's just time that we got on with it. Recognise that we need to meet our net zero emission targets. Recognise, as I said, we need, if we want to be an advanced manufacturing country, if we want to get our fair share of manufacturing, we need to get ahead of that curve in terms of renewable energies. And our government has continued to fail us in that area around the policy areas.
Jim, I know a couple of weeks back we were talking to Ross Garneau about this very issue. What would you like to respond there?
Well, first, I got to say Paul is right on the money with his argument, and I got to tell you how inspiring it is to see a principled progressive union like the AMWU just refuse to buy into this false dichotomy between jobs and the environment. So it's absolutely refreshing and absolutely important that Paul and his colleagues are taking that view. We have done some previous research through the Centre, and we refer to it in this report. My colleague Dan Nahum has got a great study out on the savings that manufacturers would enjoy as a result of moving more quickly to renewable energy sources. So the energy reliability and affordability is a big piece of it. And we got to recognize how badly manufacturers have been served by the current status quo energy policy, which privileges fossil fuels. That hasn't helped manufacturing. It's been a disaster for manufacturing, lousy supply and uncompetitive cost and unreliability. I think one of the most exciting synergies, if you like, between manufacturing and sustainability is also the potential for developing Australian-made manufactured inputs that are part of these renewable energy systems. So whether you're talking about, making lithium batteries or making windmills and components of windmills, potentially with sustainably manufactured steel and aluminium, or go full Monty, if you like, and go for making electric vehicles. So where you're capitalizing on Australia's unmatched endowment of renewable energy, but then tying in the manufactured components that go into those energy systems. That's where we'd have an absolute virtuous circle of cheap renewable energy fueling sustainable manufacturing. And that's where Ross Garneau's vision of making Australia a sustainable manufacturing superpower is so inspiring.
Thanks, Jim. I've got Louise Pratt on the line. Louise, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that fantastic presentation. A couple of questions. I've been looking at the issue of the critical minerals and the downstream processing. There's a recent report from the US Asia Centre that says the main governments have been talking about this for a long time, doing lots of reports, talking it up, but they haven't really done anything to attract capital to Australia to kind of really bring it to fruition. So what do we do? And they have a report that identifies that we haven't really taken that issue seriously. So I'm interested in your ideas about procurement, but critical minerals might not be the easiest place to make a difference in that. I also wanted to ask you about when you're looking at that issue of raising capital, the superannuation funds that will be looking for investment opportunities and how government might perhaps de-risk investment in, well, not completely de-risk it, but really, try and make investment in Australian manufacturing attractive.
Thanks, Louise. Jim, I might come to you first and then to Paul.
Sure. I agree with you. There's been a lot of reports and a lot of rhetoric and a lot of jargon, but not a lot of action. I think for the most part, because to in a way, ensure that we make the most out of those critical minerals, we're going to have to get in and interfere with the sort of normal market forces of private businesses making decisions all, solely on the basis of their own expected profits. And in that regard, an individual business will come along and say, I just want to dig out that spodumene and export it as fast as I can. And that's been the traditional approach of most business. We don't need to attract capital in the sense of actually getting enough capital to make it happen. We're awash in capital in Australia. There's lots of capital here, but we do have to make it attractive to invest in those types of value-added activities. And I think that's where active government strategies, including restrictions on exports of the unprocessed material, support for capital investment in the form of co-investments, public equity partnerships, accelerated depreciation allowances that we propose in this report, other measures like that, creating a market for Australian-made value-added products, and government procurement can play an important role there. Those are all the sorts of things that sort of laissez-faire government policy has eschewed over the last couple of decades. But I think they're going to have to get in and get their hands dirty if they want to make it more than just a kind of a jargonistic appeal that we should be doing more. We actually want to be doing more.
Thanks, Jim. Paul, the questions there around procurement and raising capital.
I think I've already stated our position on government procurement. I agree with the comment that we do have trillions of dollars in superannuation. Superannuation will be looking to invest, and that's a lot of money that we should be able to use. There's some regulations that we probably need to look at around the best interest test, for example, but that's money that we should be investing in our economy to grow our economy in our view.
Thank you. The next question here is from Margaret Simons. She asks, for all panellists, how do you see the work of the National COVID Commission Advisory Board in informing the policy around manufacturing and job creation? Paul, you've already kind of talked about the missed opportunity with the focus on gas there, but is there anything else about the work of that commission in general that you'd like to add there?
Well, again, I was very disappointed because it was just dominated by a debate about gas. And I've said gas has a place in what we need to do, but it didn't really delve down deep enough into other alternatives. It didn't delve down in what we needed to do in terms of our vet sector. We're going to be faced with new technologies, new skills, new knowledge as a result of 4.0, the Internet of Things, AI, increased robotics. All these things are going to be coming down the pipeline. You're going to be an advanced manufacturer. Unless you're ahead of the curve in those areas, you're not going to get anywhere. So vet was very important to us. But, despite raising it as an issue, despite committing to a deep dive on the issue, it never really went anywhere. Whether that's because of the timetable or not, I don't know. But I was disappointed by what I saw as, in the end, the narrow focus of the report.
Jim, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I wasn't engaged as closely as Paul was. I will say, from the outside perspective, I think that whole process, in a way, reflected the changing political calculations that the government has made as the pandemic continued. At first, they emphasized this rhetoric that we're all in this together, that this is a national emergency, we're all going to do everything we can to address it, and this is where things like the NCCC initiative came from. And in a way, it was refreshing, wasn't it? Because for years, the government's been not interested in, meaningful conversations with other stakeholders in society. Then I think as the pandemic continued, and maybe people's fears abated a bit, and the general anxiety that the whole economy was going to fall apart maybe eased off a little bit, that's when you saw the government returning to a more traditional approach, both in terms of the policy ideas that they're recommending. They're back to some of the same old, touchstones about cutting business taxes and weakening labor regulations in the interest of flexibility, et cetera, and in terms of their process, so that the NCCC thing, I think, did not live up to its potential as a kind of coming together of the major stakeholders in society to imagine a whole path forward for rebuilding Australia. So I think it's up to us in civil society to change the political calculations again and say, look, number one, the pandemic is not going away, sadly. Number two, the economy is not rebounding of its own accord. That's going to be painful. So we need an inclusive, multi-sector reconstruction plan. We saw the ACTU propose something just like that a couple of weeks ago, and I think we're going to need more discussion and mobilization around a vision like that. And then the government may decide politically it has to do that more seriously this time.
Thanks, Jim. The next question is from Ian Curry, who asks, or who says, skills are critically important to exploring manufacturing opportunities. How well placed do you think our training system is to rebuild manufacturing? First to you, Paul.
Well, as I said, I don't think we are well placed to do it. The VET system in terms of TAFE has been gutted. Funds have been stripped out of VET for a number of years, reducing its capability to deliver. There's been an overemphasis on micro credentials or micro skills and not enough emphasis on getting qualifications that are transferable, important and relevant to the industries. So that, in our view, there needs to be a lot done to VET. There needs to be some reinvestment in VET. We need to deal with those skills issues that are coming down the line, as I said, if we're going to get ahead of the curve. And that's why one of the recommendations is to set up a VET board. But it's got to be a VET board that has the stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I mean not just the TAFEs and the universities, but representatives from industry and representatives from the unions. They're the ones that know what we need to do to be able to get the skills, to be able to produce the goods, to grow our manufacturing sector.
Jim?
Eb, just before I answer that question, I do have to report that my colleague Alison Pennington has highlighted to me, hashtag fair share is now trending in Australia. So
excellent. Well done, everyone.
Well done to the audience. Thank you very much. And send it out a few more times. We'll keep it trending. So that's excellent. Thank you, Alison. There's no doubt the skills system in Australia is badly damaged by years of neglect fiscally and disastrous policy experimentation, where the idea was accepted that a sort of contestable market where the public still pays. The public subsidies to private vet producers were enormous. So this wasn't really about privatization. It was more about public money for private good instead of public good. Absolute disaster. So Australia was once recognized as a leading force in high quality vocational education. That is no longer the case. I suggest humbly Australia is a laughingstock. So rebuilding the vet system has to be a crucial part of the overall manufacturing revitalization, no doubt about that. And that has to start with the TAFEs. And the economic benefits of that will be enormous because, first of all, you'll hire people to work in TAFEs, you'll modernize the equipment and the curriculum, you'll develop new partnerships between the TAFEs and specific industries or specific firms, and you'll get back to a situation where you're really training manufacturing workers of the future in full-fledged, well-rounded skill sets, not micro-credentials, that are a cheap way for a company to meet some, specific goal, but a vision where trained workers are seen by all as a key asset in building the industry. That's got to be a crucial part of where we go.
I'll go to my other question, which is from Toby Chalmers. He asks, was there a missed opportunity supporting Australian car manufacturers to reskill and retool rather than simply close that industry down? Jim, do you want to start off on that one?
Sure. And Paul and his union obviously lived, breathed, and died that whole terrible experience. Boy, if we could turn the clock back to 2013, when those decisions, by General Motors, Holden, Ford, and Toyota were made. Again, that was a moment when the coalition government in Canberra thought, mineral prices have never been so high. We're in the middle of an enormous boom, building mines and LNG plants. Who needs the manufacturing sector? Who needs the automotive industry? And in fact, the treasurer at the time, Paul, if I remember correct, basically dared the companies to pack up and leave. And we also had an exchange rate that was vastly overvalued because of the mineral boom. And what a mistake to then just sort of wash our hands of it. I actually think we've got a surprising opportunity, more than I would have expected, to actually salvage something from that because of the huge potential now in electric vehicles. And we have seen in Victoria, thanks in part to, I'd say, some very ambitious and positive initiatives from the state government there, You've seen some very important initiatives in electric vehicle manufacturing, component manufacturing, and some of the new engineering and materials technologies there. So I don't think it's just a question of, bemoaning the mistakes that were made, because the auto industry is changing hugely. And again, because of our lithium, our renewable energy, and our domestic market, we've got a good toehold where we could build something. I'd be very positive about the potential for lithium battery and related products and sustainable technologies in transportation as part of this revitalization.
Thanks, Jim. Paul, did you have anything you wanted to add there about what happened with the car manufacturing?
Definitely. I think the car manufacturing is a glaring example of the failure of industry policy and the failure of government to understand the impact on manufacturing. It was a new low for me in government's disdain for manufacturing. We had a very strong auto industry. We had three plants manufacturing vehicles, tens of thousands of workers directly employed and downstream. We were one of 13 countries in the industrial world that could design, manufacture and produce cars. And there's not one of those countries that does not hunt for those jobs and subsidise or offer something to keep those jobs. Why do they do it? Because they are a hub for innovation, they're a hub for new technologies, they're a hub for new skills. They diffuse all that into the market, and they're high-paying, high-skilled jobs, and they're secure jobs. That's why those other countries do whatever they can to draw those companies in. But what did our Treasurer do? Our Treasurer stood up in Parliament and dared them to leave. And the next day, they did. I thought that was a disgraceful episode by an elected government, sending our jobs offshore, and I hope I never see anything like it again in this country.
You're here. I've got another question here from Alison Kakakios, who asks if you could both comment on the effect that Josh Frydenberg's remarks on the inspiration that he draws from Reagan and Thatcher has on you and manufacturing workers, and what do you think he meant by those remarks? I might start with you there, Paul.
I haven't got a clue what he meant. I don't understand it. I'm not interested in it. If he's going back to the likes of Reagan and Thatcher, he's a Luddite.
Jim, anything to add there?
I tend to agree. I think it's a political wedge. They like to throw things out like that get, the traditional suspects all in a fluff. And it's an empty, meaningless gesture. And there's nothing that Thatcher and Reagan's policies have to inform how Australia escapes from this catastrophe that we're in. In fact, we've got to do the opposite of what Reagan and Thatcher would have done. But it's irrelevant. He's just he's doing a dog whistle there, and we shouldn't even listen to it.
Yeah, I was noting on Twitter that there were street parties that erupted when Margaret Thatcher died, so I'm not sure she's a great inspiration for a great many people in Britain. And also that our colleague Richard Dennis, Jim, had written about how Margaret Thatcher was rather irritated by people acting collectively together, irritated by the National Health Service that got implemented after World War II, and how Britain had really pulled together instead of all acting in their own self-interest. So, yeah, perhaps the Treasurer will shed some further light on that, but safe to say, not popular on this panel, the Reagan-Thatcher road. We've probably got time for one more question before we wrap up. I wanted to ask here about, we've got a couple of questions that touch on the role of automation, and that manufacturing being an industry that is very heavily impacted by automation. How much do you see that having an impact on the future of the sector? I might start with you, Jim, there.
I know that there's been a lot of worry, of course, about jobs and human beings being replaced by machines. And, with the exception of my laptop, which had a mind of its own a bit earlier tonight, the reality is humans are still in charge of the machines, and the machines will in fact, make our lives better as long as we have the power to make the right decisions about how they're installed and how they're used and how the costs and benefits are shared. And to be honest, I'm more worried that Australian manufacturing has no robots than that we're being taken over by robots, because the rate of investment by business here in new technology and automation and all of those things that go with Industry 4.0 and artificial intelligence and so on has been pathetic, frankly. In fact, the period since 2014 has been the worst and most sustained decline in business investment in Australia's post-war history, which makes you wonder, gosh, and that was with a so-called pro-business government in power in Canberra. So, I think the countries that have succeeded in manufacturing haven't tried to stop new technology. Countries like Germany and Korea and Denmark and Sweden, those are countries that have used new technology, but implemented it within the context of a social and economic and political system where workers have a say. And therefore, the technology ultimately benefits workers through more jobs, higher wages, and shorter working time. And I think that's the correct direction for us to be trying to focus our energies, which is using technology as part of a broader strategy to develop our manufacturing sector in the interests of Australian people.
Thanks, Jim. Paul?
I agree with Jim. To be sure, we've got a lot of firms that are at the cutting edge of using new technologies in Australia, but we need a lot more. As I said before, if you want to be an advanced manufacturing country, if you want to take our fair share in manufacturing, we need to harness those new technologies, those new skills, and that means we've got to provide the right setting for employers to be able to invest and recapitalise in their equipment.
Paul, I might just ask you quickly too, we've got a couple of questions in here about the gender balance in manufacturing. So obviously we've seen women impacted a lot more proportionally than men during this recession. We've talked about manufacturing jobs being high wage, with good conditions, full-time mostly. What's the gender breakdown like in the manufacturing industry?
Generally, manufacturing, if I reflect our membership, it's about 9%, but it really changes where you go. So, for example, in the food sector, it's far more dominated by women workers than it is in men, as it is in some of the technical areas. It has been on the increase in some areas, which is a good thing. So that's about where we are. We'd like to see a lot more women in manufacturing, a lot more women in key positions in manufacturing, and a lot more women in our union.
Thank you very much. And if I might, just one last question here from Andrew Fraser. If we could keep our responses very brief so we can finish up on time. Andrew asks, are monopolistic regulations in ports a barrier to efficient manufacturing in Australia? And he cites the example of Port Botany, which has a monopoly on container traffic, and other ports such as Newcastle that aren't able to get as many containers through. Is that a barrier to manufacturing? I'm not sure who wants to answer that one.
Oh, there's a lot of work going on. I know with the folks around the Newcastle port who've been doing some great work about reconfiguring that port towards a more sustainable business model. Right now, it depends a lot on coal exports, of course. And I think that I don't know if it's an issue of monopoly so much as it is a game of mates with the government rewarding some of the insiders who were there in the first place. Clearly, we could do a better job with our transportation infrastructure in facilitating manufacturing and its location in different regions, including around Newcastle.
And Paul, is there any last words out there to your union members or to people working in the manufacturing sector? What are the thoughts you'd like to leave us with today?
So for me, I just think that there is a lot that we'll need to do when COVID finishes, and it will eventually finish. But it'll wreak havoc across our economy, wreak havoc across our industry. And I think there is an argument for, a type of post-war reconstruction body that involves all the stakeholders in the economy to rebuild our economy. We think there's an enormous opportunity in manufacturing. As I said, it employs up towards 900,000 people now. It can employ hundreds of thousands or more with some good policy settings and commitment from the government with vision. And you have to remember, for every one job in manufacturing, there are 3 to 5 jobs created downstream of manufacturing. And I think that's the great opportunity that we have. But what it takes is the intestinal fortitude of a government with clear vision, clear pathway, and I've yet to see that.
Thank you. We might have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Paul Bastian, National Secretary of the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, and Jim Stanford, Economist and Director at the Australia Institute's Centre for Future Work. Thank you both so much for your time today and for that excellent discussion. This has been a special episode of Follow the Money, and we're aiming to bring you shorter but more frequent episodes during the pandemic, so please stay tuned. For all the latest health information, you can visit health.gov.au or listen to the ABC's excellent CoronaCast podcast, which comes out daily. To register for future webinars, including with international guest Thomas Frank and former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, head to our website and register at tai.org.au/webinars. We're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a NNT. Jim Stanford is at Jimbo Stanford, and Paul Bastian is at Paul Bastian. That's Bastian. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macey with help from Grace Crivellero, and our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum. And remember, stay 1.5 metres away, wear a mask, keep washing those hands, and thanks for listening.